Anton Watson has worked out with 7 different NBA teams. We discuss today whether any of them are going to pick him in next week's NBA draft.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. It is Watson Workout Wednesday. We are going to talk about Anton Watson, the 7 teams that he has worked out with ahead of the NBA draft, which is coming up in just 1 week from now. June 26th is the first round. June 27th is the second round of the draft. We're going to talk about whether we think Anton Watson is going to get picked by any of these teams, whether he's going to get selected at all in the draft, what his NBA future might look like. And then we're closing out the show with our season review episode for Ryan Nembhard. Yes, folks, we are still doing the season in review episodes even here in mid to late June. We're talking Ryan Nembhard today, talking about his past, how he ended up in Spokane, what his season looked like last year, the tale of 2 halves, especially as an outside shooter, what that means for him coming into his final season of eligibility, what his role is going to look like next season, his future, his NBA future, all that covered up on today's show. But we start with Anton Watson, because as of right now, Hoops Hype, a site through the USA Today sports media group, they are a fantastic resource for all basketball knowledge, all basketball content, great website. They also track workouts, which is an incredibly difficult data point to collect. Every team is bringing in 4, 5, 6 different guys for workouts at different times. There's tons and tons and tons of different NBA teams, players that hope to be NBA players, who are working out for these teams, college guys, international guys. It is a big undertaking to track all of these workouts, but they did it. They knocked it out. Check their update here as we're a week away from the NBA draft. And Anton Watson has gotten the opportunity to work out with 7 different teams. And again, teams bring in 5 or 6 guys at a time. They usually do individual workouts, drills, measurements. They have conversations with them, kind of get to know them as people. Then they do 3-on-3 scrimmages as well. And a lot of guys who get brought in are sort of brought in to kind of help the team gauge a certain player. So if a team is bringing in a high offensive 6'8" wing, that they're like, hey, I want to see if this guy's going to translate to the next level. Can he beat guys off the dribble, etc.? They might bring Anton Watson in as sort of a foil almost. Like let's use Baylor Shireman from Creighton as an example. 6'7" wing. He's a good 3-point shooter, but if you want to know, like, hey, is Baylor Shireman the kind of guy who can, attack a closeout, put the ball on the deck, and score on somebody? You might bring Anton Watson to your workout to defend him and kind of have that role. That doesn't mean that the teams are not invested in Anton Watson or have no interest in him. It just means that there are often a variety of reasons for why a player maybe has an opportunity to work out with certain teams. It could be favors to agents. There's a lot of kind of reading between the lines to do here. I think the idea, and I know I'm kind of falling into this trap here, but the idea that the 7 teams that worked out Anton Watson are X amount more likely to draft or sign Anton Watson is not necessarily true. But they are the 7 teams that have seen him most recently, that put in the effort to bring him to their facilities to work him out. So I think we focus on talking about those 7 teams. 7 teams, I'm going to rattle them off quickly and then we'll go through them one by one. Atlanta Hawks, Boston Celtics, Cleveland Cavaliers, Denver Nuggets, Los Angeles Clippers, Los Angeles Lakers, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. No workout from my Portland Trailblazers. I will get over it. They have not rostered as many Zags historically as I'd like them to. Hopefully that'll change in the not too distant future. We'll start with Atlanta. They only have 1 pick in this draft, and it is the first one. Spoiler alert, folks, Anton Watson's not going number 1 in the 2024 NBA draft. The Hawks have had former Zags on the roster. Dan Dickau played for Atlanta. Joel Ajayi played very briefly for their summer league team. Austin Day also played for Atlanta as well. Hard to say if there's really a fit here necessarily, because Atlanta might be blowing it up. They might be looking to trade Trey. They might be looking to just kind of blow the whole roster up. If they do that, maybe there's more room for playing time. If they decide to stay competitive and they will use that pick to acquire assets to compete right away, then Anton might be appealing to them as somebody who can be an NBA-ready caliber forward. So they're tough to pin down right now because it's not really clear what direction they're going. Next up is the NBA champion Boston Celtics. They have 2 picks in this draft at number 30 and at number 54. Of course, famously drafted Kelly Olynyk about a decade ago. I can see Boston viewing Watson as somebody they could target with that 54th pick at the end of the second round. Most mock drafts don't have Watson as a draft pick right now, but Boston could ID him at that spot. He's 6'8", obviously. He's a veteran guy. He could come in, compete for minutes right away, or at least be NBA ready right away. I don't think he's going to compete for rotation minutes on the NBA defending champions. That Boston team is loaded and very good. But if you're going to use the 54th pick, you might as well use it on somebody that you think can contribute right away, because you're not a rebuilding team. So I think that's maybe why Watson is over in Boston, is getting an opportunity to be considered for that 54th pick if the team is like, hey, we want to draft somebody who could contribute for us right now, as opposed to drafting an 18-year-old who's not going to help you while you're in your championship window. Cleveland Cavaliers, pick 20. They do not have a second-round pick. There's a lot of teams on here that don't have second-round picks, and I think that Watson is probably somebody they're identifying as a priority signing. Hey, we're not going to be able to use, we don't have a second-round pick. We're not going to be able to acquire as many guys out of this draft class, but we want to be able to find the guys that we think aren't going to get drafted and get them on campus, get them on for a workout. And if we like them, we give them a call at pick 55, pick 56 and say, hey, if the last couple teams don't pick you, we'd love to sign you. That's what happened with Drew Timme. He signed with Milwaukee like 5 minutes after the conclusion of the draft. Reportedly, some teams that were interested in potentially drafting him, and they were told, hey, he's planning to sign with Milwaukee. So Anton could find himself in that position. A team like Cleveland could be in the spot to make that call. Denver Nuggets have 2 picks in the draft, 28 and 56. Again, 56 kind of feels like a spot where they might identify Anton Watson as a draft pick. Denver loves drafting older college prospects who come from successful programs. Christian Braun from Kansas, of course, Julian Strother from Gonzaga, Peyton Watson from UCLA, all recent examples of players that have had success in Denver's system and were 2, 3, 4-year guys in college who played at prolific programs. Watson, he fits the bill. He fits the bill. Now, they have a lot of guys at that position, so they may not identify that as a need in terms of depth, but it makes a lot of sense that Strother probably talked Anton Watson up. Connor Griffin, who wasn't at Gonzaga when Watson was, but is affiliated with the program before he took the job with the Brooklyn Nets, Connor Griffin may have talked him up a little bit too. So this is definitely an area, a team that I think makes sense. Whether they use that 56th pick on him or decide to sign him as a priority free agent, I would not be shocked to see Anton Watson starting his professional basketball career, at least in summer league with the Denver Nuggets. Next up, the 2 LA schools, the Clippers have picked 46, maybe. I've seen some mocks that have Anton Watson going in the 40s. It's possible that they use that pick to take Watson. They've had plenty of Zags in the past. Ronny Turiaf played there. Richie Fromm played there. This is a veteran team. They got some great forwards, obviously, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, but they could use some more depth. Those guys are injury prone. You bring in a guy like Watson, who, is probably not a guy you expect to play big minutes for that team. But if they do deal with some injuries, they can bring him in as a break glass emergency type backup forward that can come in and contribute right away. I think Leonard and Paul George are guys who play his position. Leonard in particular is a defensive focused 6'8" forward. Certainly not the worst guy for Anton Watson to learn from and develop underneath if he ends up playing for that Clippers team. Lakers love the Zags. Love the Zags. They've had tons of them. Adam Morrison, Robert Sacre, Elias Harris, Rui Hachimura, of course, currently playing for him. Ronny Turiaf played for the Lakers. They have had a lot of Zags. They come out to a lot of games. They see them on the road when they play at Pepperdine and LMU. This is a franchise that loves Gonzaga basketball players, and they are wanting to win now. Their window is wide open right now. They don't want it closed. As long as LeBron's still on the roster, if he does come back, if they draft Bronny, they bring LeBron back, Anthony Davis is back, this team is going for it again. And Anton Watson, again, maybe they look at him at pick 55 if they're not taking Bronny with that pick. Maybe they look at him as a priority free agent. Could do a lot worse than playing for the Los Angeles Lakers next season. And then last but not least, the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have 2 picks, 27 and 37. Would be pretty surprised to see them use either of those picks on Watson, but this is a team that is in win now mode. They're the first place team in the Western Conference. They're the second place team in the Western Conference this past season. Really, really great roster with Anthony Edwards, the way he's developing, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. Again, a team that might just want to use some of their free agent signings to sign older guys, veteran guys who they think can contribute to this team right away. Watson absolutely fits into that conversation, could end up being a Minnesota Timberwolf if things break his way this year. We're going to talk more about Anton Watson next week. We're going to have a draft guest on the show talking about Anton Watson's NBA draft potential, where they see him potentially going in the draft, if at all that conversation coming up early next week as we get things squared away. But for right now, I want to move on to what I believe will be our final season in review episode about Ryan Nembhard. We're going to talk about we've been talking a lot about all the new faces on Gonzaga's roster and the future for Gonzaga basketball, especially on Tuesday's show. But what I want to do right now is talk about next year's team, because they're only going to go as far as Ryan Nembhard takes them. So we're going to discuss that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Folks, passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or folks, you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from Watson Workout Wednesday. Like I said, we will have more about Anton Watson as we are a week away from the NBA draft. We'll take a look at where he ends up, what that means for him, all that coming up in a future episode of Locked On Zags. But for today, we are finishing our season in review series here on June 19th. That's probably long enough to be fully removed from last season. We're going to talk about Ryan Nembhard today. Here in this segment, we'll talk about his history, how he ended up at Gonzaga, what his first season looked like in Spokane. We'll close out the show talking about what his role is going to look like next year, how it might change with Caleb Battle and Michael Ajayi in the mix, and then his future beyond his time in Spokane with the Zags. Ryan Nembhard is a 6-foot point guard who went to Montverde Academy in Florida. He is, of course, the younger brother of former Florida Gator, former Gonzaga Bulldog, and current Indiana Pacers guard Andrew Nembhard. Andrew, of course, coming off of a tremendous run in the NBA playoffs with the Indiana Pacers. He has made himself a household name for NBA fans. He is looking like a future legitimate star in the NBA, and he might have made himself a whole bunch of money, although he's still got a couple years left on that at the time record-breaking contract that Andrew signed as a second-round pick by the Indiana Pacers. Regardless, Ryan, younger brother, kind of followed a similar path. Andrew spent 2 years at Florida, transferred to Gonzaga for his final 2 years. Ryan's going to do the same, just not at Florida. He started his career at Creighton, the top 100 prospect in that class, started with the Creighton Blue Jays, and immediately slotted into Greg McDermott's starting lineup as a freshman in the 21-22 season. He started all 27 games that he played, ultimately suffered an ankle injury in the end of February and missed the rest of the season for the Blue Jays. But in his freshman season, Nembhard averaged about 11.5 points, 4.5 assists, and 3 turnovers per game. He shot 31% from 3, and he played 35 minutes a night. Wanted to highlight the 3-point percentage, 31%, and the minutes per game, 35, because a lot of conversation about Ryan Nembhard this past season was he's playing too many minutes. He's always played 34, 35 minutes per game, and the 3-point percentage, which we will talk about more later in the show. Nembhard broke out as a sophomore. And I say breakout, like his numbers didn't dramatically increase, but across the board, he was a better basketball player as a sophomore at Creighton in the 22-23 season than he was as a freshman. He played 37 games for the Blue Jays as a sophomore, averaged 34 minutes per game, bumped his scoring from 11.3 to 12.1, his assists from 4.4 to 4.8, but notably, his turnovers went from 3.1 as a freshman to 2.1 as a sophomore. So a slight bump in assists per game and a full turnover less per game. His 3-point percentage also went up to 35.6, the highest full season mark of his career. We saw Ryan Nembhard improve as a 3-point shooter, as a free throw shooter, and as a 2-point scorer, all during his sophomore season. Again, the assists went up, the turnovers went down, and he led Creighton to the Elite Eight. Unfortunately, a lot of what people remember about Ryan Nembhard's sophomore season at Creighton was a foul he committed against Darion Trammell, the starting point guard for San Diego State. In the closing seconds of that game, San Diego State ultimately advanced to the Final Four and the national championship. Creighton's season ended in heartbreak in the Elite Eight, and so too did Ryan Nembhard's career as a member of the Blue Jays, because somewhat shockingly, Ryan Nembhard entered the transfer portal after the season. It was a stunner. I was in the Fred Meyer parking lot when I saw a notification that Ryan Nembhard entered the transfer portal, and I was flabbergasted. And as soon as I saw that notification, the first few things I saw were Arizona. It's going to Arizona. You all who are following Gonzaga closely on a day-to-day basis at this time, you all saw it. He's going to Arizona. He's going to play for Tommy Lloyd. He loves Tommy Lloyd. Andrew loved Tommy Lloyd. He's going to Arizona. Why else would he enter the transfer portal? He's coming off a season where he played 34 minutes a game as the starting guard for a team that went to the Elite Eight. Players who play 30-plus minutes a game for Elite Eight teams, they don't enter the transfer portal very often. So it was a big, big surprise when Ryan Nembhard entered the portal, especially on a team that brought back Baylor Shireman. They brought back Trey Alexander. They brought back Ryan Kalkbrenner. Then Ryan Nembhard surprised even more people by committing to join the Gonzaga Bulldogs. He came to campus. Nobody was shocked that Ryan Nembhard visited Gonzaga and that he considered Gonzaga, but everybody thought he was going to Arizona. And then suddenly, he commits to Gonzaga pretty much around the same time that Graham Ike commits to Gonzaga. And it was the really tremendous weekend off season for Gonzaga. And we're still seeing the tremendous results of that weekend, as those two guys look like All-American candidates last year and are potentially going to put themselves in the conversation as All-Americans for this upcoming season as well. Nembhard stepped into the starting role for Gonzaga at the point guard position right away in the 23-24 season, started all 35 games he played for Gonzaga, played 35.8 minutes per game, which, yes, is a career high for Ryan Nembhard, but 35.8 compared to 34.8. Just as a reminder, it's not like he's somebody who got thrust into a huge minute role despite having never done it before. He is pretty familiar with playing the vast majority of college basketball games when he's on the floor. He averaged a career high 12.6 points, a significant career high 6.9 assists, as well as 2.3 turnovers per game. Again, 4.8 turnovers 4.8 assists as a sophomore at Creighton compared to 2.1 turnovers. Last year, he averaged 6.9 assists, 2.1 more assists per game, and his turnovers only went from 2.1 to 2.3. That Gonzaga offense is so fluid and so dynamic that you see players put together elite statistical performances like this regularly when they come to Spokane. Nembhard shot a career-high 49.6% on two-pointers. He was 32.1% from three. We'll talk about that in a second. About 75% from the free throw line, all WCC performer. You could argue he was snubbed for WCC Newcomer of the Year. I'd argue Graham Ike was more snubbed for WCC Newcomer of the Year regardless. Certainly one of the most prolific players in the conference last year. And the big story for Nembhard was it was a tale of two seasons. We had the same conversation when we talked about Graham Ike. Is a similar conversation with Dusty Stromer, just kind of flipped the other direction. But a lot of players for Gonzaga really found their stride about halfway through the year. And I think a lot of that has to do with Nembhard in particular, feeling more comfortable with his role because he is the straw that stirs the drinks. In Ryan Nembhard's first 12 games in a Gonzaga Bulldogs uniform, he averaged 12 points, 5.4 assists, 2.6 turnovers. He also shot 17% from three. 17% from three in his first 12 games. In his final 23 games, so about 2/3 of the season, Ryan Nembhard averaged 12.9 points. So he went from 12 points to 12.9 points. He went from 5.4 assists to 7.7 assists. And he went from 2.6 turnovers to 2.2. So his assist numbers went up 150% while his turnover numbers dropped. Nembhard also went from shooting 17% from three to shooting 39.2% from three. And this is the point that I really want to hammer home. Ryan Nembhard, for 2/3 of the season last year for Gonzaga, was a 40% three-point shooter. The narrative around Ryan Nembhard was so driven by his early season struggles as a three-point shooter that many of you are having your minds blown by the fact that over 23 of Ryan Nembhard's 35 games for Gonzaga, he shot 40%, or 39% from three. He is not a bad three-point shooter. He had a horrible early season slump and had to make adjustments. And Gonzaga did make adjustments. They altered where they do their side to screen, ball screen actions. They relied more on Nolan Hickman as a floor spacer. They changed things up. But ultimately, Ryan Nembhard for most of last season was not only a good three-point shooter, he was a great one. And his facilitating and passing skills in that season, especially the second half, were incredible. Ryan Nembhard had 7 games with 10 or more assists. In 4 of those 7 games, he had either 1 or 0 turnovers. He had a double-double in 6 of those 7 games. Kansas was the only one he didn't. He had 5 points and 12 assists against the Jayhawks. 2 of his double-doubles, where he had 10 or more points, 10 or more assists, came against St. Mary's, one of the toughest defensive teams in the entire country. Across 3 games in the NCAA tournament, Ryan Nembhard averaged 9 points and 9.3 assists. His second half of last season was incredible. And the big conversation now, with him along with 3 other starters and a bunch of key reserves coming back for Gonzaga in the 24-25 season, is what is it going to look like? Can he put together a full season that looks like those final 25 games? And if he does, what does that mean for Gonzaga's ceiling? We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show with the final portion of our season in review episode, talking about Ryan Nembhard. We talked about how he ended up in Spokane. We talked about his career at Creighton prior to his time at Gonzaga. We talked about the first half of his season last year. We glowed about the second half of his season last year, and now we want to talk about what is this going to mean for him coming into this season. His role is not going to change. Very few players who are returning for Gonzaga are going to see their role change dramatically next season. Dusty Stromer is one where it's probably going to be different. Ben Gregg, it's unclear exactly what his is going to look like. I think mostly the same, but Michael Ajayi kind of tosses a wrench in there. Steel Venters, I guess, is a returner, but his role is obviously going to be different because he is going to play. Ryan Nembhard is Gonzaga's starting point guard. He will play 33 to 35 to 38 minutes per game. Caleb Battle potentially allows him to play less minutes, but I don't think he's going to play less minutes. I would be very surprised if Ryan Nembhard averages under 34 minutes per game next year. He's going to have the same role. He's going to play a bunch. He's going to have the ball in his hands every single possession. He is going to be the player that makes things happen for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. And the hope is that what we saw from him in the second half last year, when he averaged about 8 assists, barely over 2 turnovers per game, when he shot 39% from 3, when he was racking up 15 point, 10 assists, 0 turnover games, that version of Ryan Nembhard for a full season. That's what you want. That's what you hope for. That's what Mark Few wants. That's what I want. That's what you all listening want. And more importantly, that's what Ryan Nembhard wants. Is it sustainable? Is he able to do that? That's the question. I'm not going to sit here and project that Ryan Nembhard will finish next season shooting 39% from 3. He's never done it in his career. He was 35% was the best he ever was as a sophomore at Creighton. He was 31% as a freshman. Finished last year 32%, but obviously part of that was that horrible early season slump. 39% for a full season feels unlikely. Is it impossible? Absolutely not. Of course not. He did it for 23 games. Who's to say he can't do it for 35? I think teams will defend him a little bit differently. I think a lot of his success as a three-point shooter last year came in those the first wave of him kind of getting out of that slump when teams were not defending him from the three-point line. I think that will change, and we will see more hands in his face defensively, but he's also got really talented scorers around him. Michael Ajayi is a more gifted offensive player than Anton Watson. That doesn't mean that he's a better player than Anton Watson because Watson was exceptional defensively, but Ajayi has more range and is going to take up more of defenders' time than Anton Watson did. Caleb Battle is a tremendous microwave scorer. He's elite at getting to the free throw line. He is going to wreak havoc on opposing defenses. Those two guys, A more comfortable Graham Ike in his role, a more comfortable Braden Huff in his role, a floor spacer in Steel Venters. All of this gives Ryan Nembhard so much ammunition to do what he wants to do, to get to his spots, to get his looks. And defenses are going to have a hard time focusing on stopping Ryan Nembhard from shooting with all the talent around him. So can he shoot 39%? Yeah. I'd project more like 36, 37, but 37% for a full season. If you told me that in December of last year, I would have called you crazy. He didn't look at all like that. The fact that that seems like a reasonable projection is a great sign of the development that he has made. We talked a little bit about Khalif Battle and Michael Ajayi. They alter Ryan Nembhard's role, but not dramatically. Not really his role as much as just they alter the team chemistry around him. Like I said, I think Ajayi is going to pull more attention from defenders than Anton Watson did. He's going to be perceived as more of a threat. Both of them were 40+% three-point shooters last year on a low volume. I do think Ajayi is probably a better three-point shooter than Anton Watson, who was historically quite bad up until last season. And I do think defenders are going to respect him more as an outside shooter, I guess is the best way to put that. Again, Steel Venters being in the mix, depending on what his minutes look like. He's going to pull a lot of defenders away from the cup, which gives Nembhard more driving room. Khalif Battle is going to just be a wrecking ball, getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line, converting there. That's going to be a big part of his game. So I think the two-man game between Nembhard and Graham Ike is going to be similar. They're going to do the high ball screen action. They're going to look to get him the basketball. If defenders go under, Nembhard's going to make them pay by hitting those outside shots. If the defenders come around, Nembhard's going to start going to the cup. If Graham Ike is open, he's going to get it to him. If not, he's going to drive to the hole. And I think having somebody like Steel Venters out on the wing, or Michael Ajayi out on the wing, or Khalif Battle is going to make defenders less willing to stop Ryan Nembhard when he's driving to the hoop, which either allows him to score easily around the rim, or if the defenders come over, you kick it out to Steel Venters. He's catching the ball on the wing wide open from three. That is dang near automatic for him. So the biggest area of growth for Ryan Nembhard is, of course, the outside shooting. You want to see the consistency there. I think it can be there, in part because we saw 23 games of him shooting 39%, and in part because I think the personnel around him allows him to have a little bit more freedom, and maybe defenders are going to have a harder time defending him and staying in front of him when he's on offense. So I think that gives him an opportunity to really have more open looks and potentially capitalize on that next season. What's the future look like? Well, this is it. There's no mystery. When we did the Graham Ike season in review, when we did the Steel Venters, it was like, well, they have this many years. They technically have the COVID year. They could do this. They could do this. This is it for Ryan Nembhard. He's entering his final season of eligibility. No mystery. There's no COVID year. There's no appeal. This is it. Same with Nolan Hickman. Same with Khalif Battle. Same with Michael Ajayi. Same with Ben Gregg. A bunch of key pieces for Gonzaga this upcoming season are entering their final year of eligibility. We talked about why we think it's great that Mark Few and the Zags have been able to continue to build a roster ready to compete right now, while also looking out for the future with guys like Braden Smith and Emmanuel and Achente or whatever. But for Ryan Nembhard, the goal is right now. This is it. This is his final year of college basketball. He's going to have opportunities to help Gonzaga in the future by mentoring Braden Smith. I don't know how directly he's going to be asked to do that, but just by virtue of competing against him every day in practice, that's going to help Gonzaga in the future. But this is Ryan Nembhard's final hurrah for college basketball, for Mark Few and the Zags. What does his future look like beyond that? Obviously, it depends on how next season goes, but here's the situation. People will look at Andrew Nembhard's tremendous success this past year, particularly in the playoffs, and will put that on Ryan as, hey, look, this is what your brother was able to do. Now we think, higher view of an NBA prospect. You've already seen people on NBA draft Twitter who are like, well, Andrew Nembhard just scored 32 points in the playoffs. Check out highlights of his brother Ryan at Gonzaga. There's one key issue with that. I guess there's 5 key issues with that. And that's the difference between 6'5" and 6'0". Because Andrew Nembhard's listed at 6'5". I don't know what he measured in without shoes, 6'4", maybe even 6'3.5", something like that. Ryan Nembhard is listed at 6 foot. There's a good chance that if Ryan Nembhard gets invited to the NBA draft combine, which he probably will if he puts together a similar season, that he will measure at something like 5'10", 5'11". And frankly, there's not room for under 6 foot guards in the NBA. There's just not. It's not a knock on Ryan. It's just a fact about the modern NBA. They value size in the backcourt, size in the front court, length, range, more than anything. It used to be all about youth and upside, and it still is to an extent. Although you're starting to see teams push back on that and draft older prospects like Brandon Pajemski or Jaime Jaquez in recent years because they realize that you're getting more value, more bang for your buck if they can contribute all 4 years of their rookie contract. But what is consistent right now across all 32 teams in the NBA is wanting length and size at every position, including point guard. There is nothing Ryan Nembhard can do to change the fact that he is 6 foot tall. Nothing. And he can be the fastest guy, which he is. He's an elite athlete in terms of sprinting up and down the floor. He can be an elite passer, which he is. He averaged 7 assists per game last year, one of the tops in the entire country. But at the end of the day, the fact that he is the size that he is probably going to prevent him from being selected in the NBA draft. I would be surprised if he gets picked in the 2026 NBA draft after this season, 2025 NBA draft, excuse me. Doesn't mean he won't make the NBA. Maybe he gets a 2-way contract. He gets a summer league invite, does well enough there, gets signed onto a roster. That could happen. Maybe he goes overseas, dominates over there, comes back. Maybe he just has a professional career overseas or in the G League and doesn't end up making the NBA. That's what I think is the most likely, and it's unfortunate because it has nothing to do with his skill set, just the fact that he is not big enough in the current archetype for an NBA point guard is just not something that he fits because of his size. That's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast, here on Watson Workout Wednesday, like we called it. Next week, at this time, we'll be talking NBA draft. We'll talk what happens to Anton Watson. We'll talk a little bit about what happens to the 2 Washington State guys, Isaac Jones and Jalen Wells, as well as San Francisco's Jonathan Mobo as well. All that coming up next week. And then we'll continue to keep you up to date as the Olympics get rolling in, as we continue to look at Gonzaga's full roster now at this point and what it looks like coming into next season. All that coming up later this week and into July as we get through this offseason. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.